The night was unnaturally still, the kind of silence that made even the stars seem like muted spectators. Deep in the Carpathian Mountains, an ancient castle stood as a relic of bygone eras. Its crumbling spires pierced the heavens, a silhouette of forgotten power and dread. Inside, beneath layers of dust and decay, a stone sarcophagus trembled. The seals that had held it shut for centuries now cracked, releasing an ominous hiss. A hand emerged, pale and clawed, followed by the figure of Count Dracula himself. His crimson eyes glowed faintly in the dim torchlight as he surveyed his surroundings. The air reeked of stagnation, but something beyond the castle walls had stirred him. A foreign presence, a challenge to his dominion, was rising. Dracula, once content in his eternal slumber, now felt compelled to act. Far to the north, in the desolate Arctic wastes, a lone figure trudged through the snow. His massive frame bore the scars of countless encounters with the cruelty of man and nature alike. This was the creature born of Victor Frankenstein's ambition, a patchwork of flesh and despair known simply as the monster. His yellowed eyes scanned the horizon, but it was not the icy winds or the unending frost that troubled him. It was a strange pull, an irresistible force drawing him southward. He did not know its origin, but it felt ancient, powerful, and malicious. As Dracula emerged from his crypt, the castle itself seemed to groan in acknowledgment of its master's return. He moved through the great hall, where faded tapestries depicted battles fought long ago. At the edge of the room, a dark figure knelt, Renfield, his loyal servant. Though frail and maddened, Renfield had sensed his master's awakening and awaited orders. "Master," Renfield rasped, bowing low, "the world has changed, but your dominion remains." Yet, a great shadow spreads across the land. Dracula's gaze was piercing. "What shadow? Speak plainly," Renfield stammered. "A force unlike any other. I cannot name it, but it calls out to the immortals." The vampire lord's lips curled into a faint snarl. This was no mere disturbance of the natural order. It was a challenge to his supremacy. Without another word, Dracula stepped into the night, his form dissolving into a swarm of bats that disappeared into the darkness. Simultaneously, the monster reached the remnants of a long-abandoned outpost. The wooden structures creaked under the weight of the snow, and scattered tools lay frozen in place, untouched for years. But something else was here, something unnatural. Symbols etched into the snow glowed faintly, forming patterns that seemed alive. He approached cautiously, his heavy boots crunching against the icy ground. As he studied the symbols, the pull he felt intensified. A vision overtook him, a towering figure wreathed in shadows, its eyes burning with malice. It was a Voidbringer, an entity of unimaginable darkness. The vision faded as quickly as it came, leaving the monster breathless. He realized then that this force was not only a threat to him, but to the very world he had grown to despise, yet stubbornly endured. Dracula and the monster's paths were destined to intersect. Their journeys brought them to a ruined abbey on the edge of a forgotten village. The abbey, once a place of light and salvation, now stood as a decaying husk, its windows shattered and its pews covered in mold. Both arrived under cover of night, each unaware of the other's presence until they stepped into the same shadowed hall. Dracula materialized from the darkness, his crimson eyes scanning the monster. "Who dares trespass in my domain?" he asked, his voice low and threatening. The monster turned slowly, his imposing frame dwarfing even Dracula's presence. "I seek no quarrel with you, vampire. I follow the call of a greater threat." Dracula's expression shifted from anger to intrigue. "You speak of the Voidbringer." The monster nodded. "It appeared to me in a vision, a shadow that consumes all." Dracula's tone hardened. "Then you understand why this cannot be ignored. But why should I trust a creature of stitched flesh?" The monster's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "I did not ask for your trust, nor do I offer mine. But if we do not act, this force will destroy even you." A tense silence filled the room, broken only by the distant howling of the wind. Finally, Dracula stepped forward. Very well. Let us see if your strength matches your words. As the unlikely duo explored the abbey, they uncovered more evidence of the Voidbringer's presence. Ancient carvings in the stone walls depicted a battle between immortals and a shadowed figure, its form shifting and unnatural. Dracula recognized the sigils as those of an ancient order sworn to protect the balance between light and darkness. "This is no ordinary foe," Dracula remarked. "It feeds on us, the immortal, the unnatural. Its hunger will not be sated until nothing remains." The monster studied the carvings, his brow furrowed. "If this is true, then even my existence may serve as its sustenance." Dracula's gaze lingered on him. "You may despise what you are, but you were made for a purpose. Perhaps that purpose is this." The two prepared to leave the abbey, but the air suddenly grew colder, unnaturally so. Shadows stretched and twisted, coalescing into forms that resembled neither man nor beast. They attacked without warning, their movements fluid and chaotic. Dracula's fangs gleamed as he lunged into the fray, his claws ripping through the shadowy entities. The monster swung his massive fists, each blow dispersing the creatures into plumes of darkness. Despite their efforts, the creatures multiplied, forcing them to retreat deeper into the abbey. There, they found a hidden passage leading to a crypt. Dracula's sharp senses detected an ancient energy within, and he pushed forward undeterred. The monster followed, his steps heavy but resolute. In the crypt, they discovered a relic, an obsidian shard glowing faintly with a pulsating light. Dracula reached for it but hesitated. "This is part of the Voidbringer," he said, his voice grim. "A fragment of its essence." The monster studied the shard. "Then we must find the rest. Only by understanding its power can we hope to destroy it." Dracula nodded, though his expression remained cautious. "Agreed. But this alliance will not last beyond necessity." The monster's reply was simple. "It doesn't need to." Above them, the wind howled louder, carrying with it the distant echo of a sinister laugh. The Voidbringer knew they were coming. The crypt walls pulsed faintly with a sinister energy, the air thick with an unnatural chill. Dracula and the monster stood before the obsidian shard, its faint glow seeming to breathe, an echo of the Voidbringer's distant heartbeat. For all their differences, an unspoken understanding passed between them. They were not allies by choice but by necessity. Dracula reached into the shadows, producing a dark silk cloth. He wrapped the shard with careful precision, his crimson eyes narrowing as he spoke. "This fragment is a key. It carries a trace of the Voidbringer's essence. If it seeks to consume us, it will be drawn to its own." The monster, his massive form looming like a storm cloud, watched intently. "And how do you propose we find the other fragments?" "The Voidbringer's shadow spreads faster than we can move." Dracula's lips curled into a faint, sardonic smile. "You forget, creature, that I am not bound by mortal constraints. I move where shadows allow." "And I," the monster countered, his voice a low rumble. "I am no wraith, bound to the dark." Dracula tilted his head. "No, but your strength is invaluable. You will hold the ground while I strike from above. Together, we will ensure the Voidbringer has no refuge." Their plan formed quickly, born of urgency rather than trust. Dracula unfurled an ancient map he had discovered in the crypt, the parchment brittle with age yet marked with symbols that mirrored the shard's pulsating glow. He traced a clawed finger along the map's surface. "These markings," he began, "indicate points of power. If the Voidbringer's essence is scattered, its fragments will seek places of resonance. This abbey was one. The next lies deep within the black forest." The monster grunted, his brow furrowing. "We waste time speaking. Lead the way." Dracula's eyes gleamed. "Patience, creature. The path is fraught with danger, and brute strength alone will not suffice." The monster's response was simple but firm. "Danger is no stranger to me." Their journey to the Black Forest was silent and tense. Dracula traveled as a flock of bats, his form reassembling periodically to guide the monster through treacherous terrain. The monster, bound to the earth by his colossal frame, moved with relentless determination, each step a testament to his endurance. As they entered the forest, the air grew oppressive, thick with a darkness that seemed alive. Trees loomed like sentinels, their branches twisting unnaturally. "This place reeks of malice," the monster observed, his voice cutting through the silence. Dracula nodded. "The Voidbringer's influence grows. It is near." The forest seemed to react to their presence. Shadows deepened, and whispers echoed among the trees, forming half-words in an ancient tongue. Dracula halted suddenly, his gaze fixed ahead. "We are not alone." From the shadows emerged grotesque figures, corrupted forms of animals and men, their bodies warped by the Voidbringer's power. Their eyes burned with a sickly green light, and their movements were erratic, as if controlled by an unseen puppeteer. Dracula's fangs gleamed, the Voidbringer's servants, weak echoes of its power, but dangerous in numbers. The monster cracked his massive knuckles, his expression unchanging. "Then we end them." The battle was fierce and unrelenting. Dracula moved like a phantom, darting between enemies with lethal precision. His claws tore through corrupted flesh, leaving only ashes in their wake. The monster, a force of nature, waded into the fray with devastating strength. Each swing of his massive fist shattered bones and sent foes flying into the trees. But the creatures did not relent. For every one they felled, two more emerged from the shadows. Dracula hissed in frustration. "They are endless. We must find the fragment." The monster roared, his voice shaking the very ground. "Then find it. I will hold them." Dracula hesitated for only a moment before vanishing into the darkness, leaving the monster to face the horde alone. The corrupted creatures swarmed him, their claws and teeth scraping against his hardened flesh. Yet he stood firm, his defiance an immovable wall against the tide of darkness. Deeper into the forest, Dracula found what he sought, a small, ancient altar, overgrown with vines yet pulsing with the same eerie light as the shard. The second fragment floated above it, surrounded by a sphere of crackling energy. Dracula approached cautiously, his every sense attuned to danger. As he reached for the fragment, the air around him rippled. A shadow coalesced into a humanoid form, larger and more defined than the corrupted creatures. Its voice was a guttural growl. "You dare to challenge the Voidbringer?" Dracula's eyes narrowed. "I am Count Dracula. I bow to no shadow." The entity lunged, its claws slicing through the air with deadly precision. Dracula met it head-on, their clash sending shockwaves through the forest. The fight was brutal, a contest of speed and cunning. Dracula's strikes found purchase, but the shadow entity was resilient, its form shifting and reforming with each blow. Finally, with a surge of strength, Dracula plunged his claws into the entity's core. It dissolved into smoke, and the sphere of energy surrounding the fragment dissipated. Dracula seized the fragment, its power surging through him. Returning to the monster, Dracula found the battlefield littered with the remains of the corrupted creatures. The monster stood at its center, his massive frame heaving with exertion but unbroken. Dracula held up the second fragment. "We have what we need." The monster nodded, his voice steady despite his fatigue. "Then let us move before more come." As they left the forest, the air seemed to lighten, though the threat of the Voidbringer loomed ever larger. Dracula and the monster were united in purpose, but remained wary of each other. They knew their alliance was temporary, bound by the necessity of survival rather than trust or camaraderie. Cliffhanger. As they exited the forest, the fragments began to glow brighter, resonating with a third, distant power. Dracula's expression darkened. "It is calling to us, or warning us." The monster's reply was grim. "Then we go to it. Whatever awaits, we face it together." Above them, the night sky seemed to ripple, the stars dimming as if the Voidbringer itself was watching. The final confrontation was drawing near. The sky above the desolate ruins churned with unnatural energy, streaked with violet and black, as if the heavens themselves recoiled from the presence of the Voidbringer. Dracula and the monster stood at the precipice of an ancient, circular arena carved into the heart of the mountains. At its center, a pulsating vortex of shadow and light marked the Voidbringer's manifestation point. Dracula unfurled his cloak, his crimson eyes narrowing as he surveyed the arena. "This is where it will make it stand," he said, his voice cold and resolute. The fragments called to each other, forming the core of its strength. It must be destroyed before it fully manifests. The monster, his massive frame silhouetted against the flickering vortex, nodded grimly. No speeches, no plans, just action. We finished this. The fragments they had collected began to vibrate in unison, pulled by an invisible force toward the vortex. Dracula held his fragment tightly, the power within it clawing at his mind. "It's awakening," he warned. "Prepare yourself." Before the monster could respond, the ground beneath them cracked, and tendrils of darkness erupted from the earth, forming jagged spires. The Voidbringer's voice echoed from the void, a deep, resonant growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "You dare challenge me with my own essence? Foolish creatures! I am beyond your comprehension." From the shadows, the Voidbringer began to take form. It was colossal, a shifting mass of darkness and jagged edges, its shape constantly morphing. Eyes, thousands of them, opened across its surface, glowing with malevolent intelligence. Dracula bared his fangs, his form dissolving into a swarm of bats before reassembling closer to the vortex. He struck first, his claws slashing at one of the Voidbringer's tendrils. The attack tore through its shadowy flesh, but the wound closed instantly, the darkness reforming with a chilling ease. The monster roared, charging forward with the force of an avalanche. His fists crashed into the Voidbringer's body, sending shockwaves through the arena. Unlike Dracula's strikes, the monster's raw power left a deeper impact, the entity recoiling as parts of its form dissipated into smoke. The Voidbringer retaliated, unleashing a torrent of shadowy projectiles that rained down like black hail. Dracula moved with inhuman speed, dodging the attacks and countering with precision. The monster, unyielding, used his massive arms as shields, absorbing the brunt of the assault. The battlefield became a storm of chaos, shadows clashing with flesh and fang, the ground quaking with every blow. Dracula noticed something as he fought. The fragments they carried seemed to weaken the Voidbringer whenever they drew near. He called out to the monster, "The fragments, bring them closer to the vortex." The monster, locked in combat with a massive tendril, grunted in acknowledgement. With a titanic effort, he ripped the tendril free and hurled it aside, making his way toward the vortex. Dracula followed, their fragments glowing brighter with each step. The Voidbringer screamed, its voice shaking the heavens. "You will not succeed! I am eternal." The vortex began to pull them in, its gravitational force growing stronger. Dracula planted his feet, driving his claws into the ground to anchor himself. The monster, his immense weight providing stability, moved forward with deliberate determination. As they reached the edge of the vortex, the fragments in their possession began to merge, forming a sphere of pure light and darkness, a concentrated essence of the Voidbringer. Dracula reached for it, but the energy surged violently, pushing him back. The monster stepped forward, his massive hand engulfing the sphere. He grimaced as the energy coursed through him, the conflicting forces of light and darkness threatening to tear him apart. "Do it now," he growled through clenched teeth. Dracula hesitated for only a moment before leaping onto the monster's back, using his claws to steady himself. He channeled his own vampiric energy into the sphere, stabilizing it. Together, they forced the sphere into the heart of the vortex. The reaction was immediate. The Voidbringer's form convulsed, its tendrils thrashing wildly as the vortex consumed its essence. The ground beneath them split apart, and the air became a maelstrom of energy. The Voidbringer roared, its voice filled with fury and desperation. "You cannot destroy me. I will return." Dracula's expression remained cold. "Not today." With a final surge of strength, the monster drove the sphere deeper into the vortex. The light within it exploded outward, consuming the Voidbringer's form. The arena was engulfed in blinding radiance, and then silence. When the light faded, the arena was in ruins. The vortex was gone, leaving only a scorched crater. Dracula stood, his cloak tattered, his expression unreadable. The monster lay nearby, his massive form still. Dracula approached him, his steps cautious. The monster stirred, his voice a low rumble. "Is it over?" Dracula nodded. "For now, but its threat lingers in the shadows. We have only delayed the inevitable." The monster sat up, his movements slow but deliberate. "Then we wait. If it returns, so will we." Dracula's lips curled into a faint smile. "Perhaps you are not as dull-witted as you appear." The monster chuckled, a rare sound from the towering creature. "And you're not as heartless as you pretend." They stood together at the edge of the crater, two unlikely allies forged in the crucible of darkness. The sky above began to clear, the stars shining once more. Yet both knew the peace was temporary. The Voidbringer's echoes would return, and when they did, Dracula and the monster would be ready. Cliffhanger ending. Far away, in another forgotten corner of the world, a faint pulse of energy stirred. The Voidbringer's essence, though diminished, remained scattered. The battle was won, but the war was far from over.